Before we start with any instrumentations, we need to make sure we meet the guidelines. I'm going to work on quad 4 and I am right-handed. So I'm going to be using a 9 o'clock work position. My patient's head should be chin down and slightly away from me because I'm working on the buccal surface. I'm going to start with the 1112 Explorer, which is a double-ended instrument with mirror image working ends. To determine the correct working end, we are going to use the premolars to test this. The lower shank should be parallel to the teeth. In this case, it goes across the tooth, and that is the incorrect working end. If we insert the other end, then we establish a parallel terminal shank. So we're going to start on the mandibular first molar. Our grasp should be relaxed and the middle finger rests lightly on the terminal shank. For the adaptation, we need to establish that the first 2 millimeters of the tip are going to be adapted to the tooth. We're going to work with light pressure with the working end against the tooth. For this instrument, we are going to activate a wrist motion, not a finger motion. We are going to use many overlapping strokes to cover every square millimeter of the root surface. For this instrument, we're going to use a very light grasp and avoid a death grip on the handle. This is going to allow us to use our tactile senses to these hidden deposits. Okay, so we're going to start on the mandibular first molar. We are going to explore the distal surface beginning at the distal facial line angle. The tip should be aimed at the back of the mouth, which is the direction that we are working in. We need to adapt the face of the explorer to the tooth surface. We're going to slide the tip beneath the gingival margin. We're going to roll the instrument handle slightly to adapt to the distal surface. We have to keep the tip adapted at all times. Now we're going to explore the facial and mesial surfaces starting at the distal facial line angle. We're going to insert into the sulcus, maintaining a good fulcrum. We remove the tip of the explorer from the sulcus and turn it so that you are aiming towards the front of the mouth, which is the direction that we're working on. As you approach the mesiofacial line angle, you're going to start to roll the instrument like this to keep the tip adapted. You have to explore at least halfway towards the mesial surface. This will be completed when you are exploring on the lingual surface. With anterior teeth, you are going to start at the midline of the tooth and do the correct sequence again, inserting the face of the surface of the tip, rolling as you go towards the mesial surfaces, always maintaining 2 millimeters of the tip adapted to the tooth at all times. For the probe, the probing depths are measured and recorded on a periodontal chart. We are going to record 6 measurements per tooth when we're going to use the deepest measurement of each zone. For the zones, we divide it into 6 parts, which is the distal facial, direct facial or buccal, the mesial buccal, the distal lingual, direct lingual, and mesiolingual. We established that because we are working on the quadrant 4, we are going to be on a 9 o'clock position and we are going to start by inserting into the distal line angle of number 30, and we're going to keep the side of the tip in contact with the tooth surface as you gently slide the probe into the sulcus base, like so. Walk the probe across the distal surface until you reach the contact area. At this point, you need to tilt the probe just slightly so that the probe is adapted parallelly to the tooth. It's important to do the walking strokes, which are bobbing strokes, and forward, moving the instrument like 1 millimeter at a time. And then reinsert here at the distal facial line angle and continue doing the bobbing strokes until you reach the mesial facial line angle. At this point, you need to adapt and slightly slant the tip of the probe so that it is always adapted to the tooth. For area-specific curettes, we are going to have the 11-12 Gracie curette and the 13-14 Gracie curette, which are used, as the name says it. Area-specific means that the 13-14 is going to be used for distal surfaces of posterior teeth, and the 11-12 are going to be used for mesial surfaces of posterior teeth. We are going to start with the 13-14. I'm going to start at the distal surface of number 30. To determine the correct working end, we need to make sure that the lower shank is parallel to the tooth. In this case, this is not the correct end because it goes across the tooth. This right here would be the correct working end. The toe should be aimed towards the back of the mouth, which is the direction we're working at. We're going to lower the handle and gently slide the working end beneath the gingival margin because this is a subgingival instrument. At this point, we're going to do a 70-degree angle so that the cutting edge is adapted to the tooth. To determine the correct sequence, we would start at the premolar, the first premolar, insert, and gently but firmly start working the distal surface while maintaining the tooth adapted. The toe third adapted to the tooth at all times. We start at the distal line angle, insert at a 70-degree, then move toward a 90-degree and pull. Biting strokes. We would do this until we reach the end of all the distal surfaces. For the mesial surfaces, we would change into the 11-12. It would be the same concept in establishing the correct working end, which is maintaining the lower shank parallel to the teeth. In this case, we're going to insert the instrument at the distal line angle, maintaining a 70-degree angle, and then gently pulling it up so that the face of the working end, or the cutting end, is adapted to the tooth. And we're going to do this until we reach the mesial line angle and we maintain the instrument adapted at all times. We do the same until we reach the premolar. It is important to maintain a correct and good fulcrum and wrist activation, and not to rely on finger activation. Remember to roll the instrument as you approach the mesial line angle to keep it adapted. The 204S is a sickle scaler, and to determine the correct working end of this instrument, it is the same concept. We need to make sure that the lower shank is parallel to the teeth. This would be an example of the incorrect working end. This instrument is used for proximal surfaces of posterior teeth and for supragingival calculus. Okay, I'm going to use the example of the first molar. I need to make sure that my fulcrum is correct. And because this is a sickle scaler, I need to make sure not to insert it subgingivally too much because it may damage the gingival structure. So I'm going to insert and slightly slant it so the cutting edge is adapted to the tooth, and pull in small biting strokes. Starting always at the distal line angle, and then we move towards the mesial line angle. Same concept, maintaining the cutting edge adapted to the tooth, towards the tooth and not towards the gingiva.